The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Well, we got all the fireworks of the draft coming up, but the weekend, not to be outdone, massive Kawhi Leonard news coming out over the weekend. That was fun. And for a pragmatic Laker fan, even a tiny bit more fun. If you'd like, by the way, additional coverage of this Kawhi Leonard stuff, you should probably check out a Lakers podcast, which we do here at Hoop Ball, at Hoop Ball Lakers on Twitter. That podcast, of course, yours truly, Dan Besbris. I'll tell you more about this show in a moment. And my good friends, Eli Bauman, Dr. Eric Noble, breaking down the Lakers' off-season plans and how they may actually, well, starting to come together a little bit. Maybe. We're not going to get into that a ton on this podcast because this is Fantasy NBA Today. This isn't the Lakers podcast. This is Fantasy NBA Today, a hoop ball presentation. I am Dan Besbris. Told you that a moment ago. At Dan Besbris on Twitter. And, of course, at Hoop Ball Fantasy, if you want to give the website, Twitter account a follow. Late last week, I made mention of the fact that all of our shows now are available via YouTube and through Facebook. You can go to the Hoop Ball page on Facebook and check out all of our podcasts. They're all released about 15 minutes or so after the show comes out. Same deal as over at YouTube. It's the same thing. Working on trying to build up some YouTube subscribers, some Facebook interactivity. So please do. If you have a moment today, check that out. Again, the page on Facebook is, it's not just Hoop Ball, unfortunately. That was taken already. So it's facebook.com/hoopballhoops. I'm not kidding. Hoop Ball Hoops is the Facebook page. YouTube is a lot easier. That one is just Hoop Ball. That's youtube.com/c/hoopball. That's how you get to directly to the channel. You can subscribe to us there. You can check out all the podcasts. They don't have any video attached to them, but they are available via YouTube if you don't want to watch it or listen to it, I should say, through iTunes, the podcast app, or Stitcher, or Google Play, or Spotify, or iHeartRadio, or whatever you use. We have a couple more places now. That's the main point of all of this. You just got more outlets. As far as today goes, we have turned the corner here. We are into our very last division. The Atlantic Division. That's the last one. And our season in review. We're going through every team. We've done 25 of them, one by one, talking about what went right, what went wrong, both from a reality and fantasy standpoint. We talked about sports betting through the playoffs, but those are over now, so we're really floating out on an island. The draft, I feel like we're 24 hours away, a little bit more than that, I guess. But that's coming up. I've told you guys already, I know almost nothing about what these players can do, but I will take some time on a podcast this week. We'll talk about who went where, and if any big trades go down. I mean, that's a distinct possibility. Guys could get moved before the draft, depending on where people go. There are certain teams that you'd figure their pick would be in play. That might not be the case for the Lakers. But it could certainly for some teams that have different packages to put together. You know, some teams are trying to unload stupid contracts, and they're doing so by attaching them to coveted picks. Anyway, this is all conjecture, hearsay, whatever. It's bad radio is what it is. So let's talk about fantasy stuff. Let's talk about reality stuff. Let's talk about the first team in our Atlantic Division review. The Philadelphia 76ers. I wanted to start with a team where I got it so very wrong this year. I'll admit. Going into the season, I thought Joel Embiid would miss significant time. I thought that would jettison this team, but he was heavily healthy. Largely played. He played 63 games, which isn't great, but it's more than I expected. Now, I figured that was, I figured 70 was probably a best-case scenario. Missed a handful of games. Philly ended up playing okay, even with Embiid out, but obviously they're a much better team with him in the mix. They got really strong performances from Marco Bellinelli and Ersan Ilyasova, who they picked up midway through the season. Didn't see that coming. J.J. Redick was excellent. And then, the big thing this year was that Rob Covington showed a little bit more consistency, and Ben Simmons turned out to be very good. Better than I think people expected. He had a fantastic year. 16, 8, and 8. But more than anything, 1.7 steals, 0.8 blocks per game. Those are Covington-esque defensive numbers. Of course, without the three-pointer, but with 54.5% from the field. A miserable free throw percentage. But, again, he shot the free throw well enough where Hacka Simmons was not used all that often this year. And his other stuff was so good that even when you kind of knew what he was going to do, it became very difficult to stop simply because of his combination of size and speed. He's 6'10". He's a monster. He's the tallest point guard that the NBA probably has ever seen. And he's a point guard. He really is. He handles like a point guard, passes like a point guard. 8 assists per game. That is not nothing. That's a significant number. So I thought this team was going to make slow and steady progress. They made a big leap this year. They jumped all the way to the 3 seed. I have a weird feeling about next year that things are going to level off a tiny bit for the 76ers. That is to say, I don't know that there's that next leap. I don't know if that's within grasp yet. Obviously, this does depend a bit on what free agents they may or may not pick up this offseason. But let's say it's mostly the same guys back again. And now, J.J. Redick, his contract was a 1-year deal, so he's off the books. But the rest of these guys are pretty much there. Amir Johnson, I think he's gone too, but nobody cares. The other guys are there. Rob Covington, he's signed for 4 more years. Obviously, you got the rookie deals for Markelle Fultz, Embiid, Saric. You've got T.J. McConnell for another year, Richaun Holmes, the second round type of guys. So some money comes off the books, but this team had flexibility anyway, so that's not really an issue. And yes, obviously they're going to be making a significant run at guys like LeBron James, Paul George, whoever, packages for perhaps guys like Kawhi Leonard. But again, we sort of have to do this assuming the most likely scenario, which, when we talked about the Cavaliers last week, it was that LeBron James would be leaving. That seems like a foregone conclusion. With the Sixers, the most likely scenario is they get someone, but we don't know who. And if LeBron orchestrates an, all hands on deck move to some new city, like perhaps LA, and that's what we're hearing right now, then maybe the Sixers don't get a free agent. And maybe this is the team they field next year. Rob Covington, Ben Simmons, Dario Saric, Joel Embiid, and then somebody. Does Redick come back at a discount? I don't think he's going to make $23 million again. Does Marco Bellinelli sign a deal that more in line with how he performed with this team? Ilyasova, what about his deal? He got nothing. He made nothing with Philadelphia because his contract was being paid for by the Atlanta Hawks. They both were. So I don't, and that's not to take anything away from the 76ers because, like I said, I got this season very wrong. I thought they would make a step forward. I didn't think they would take 4 steps forward, which is basically what they did. And they finished the regular season on a 16-game winning streak. They were going to go over the mark regardless. Obviously, with the 16-game win streak, they went blasting over the Vegas season win total number, which was 500. They expected them to be a 500 team. But I don't know. They'll have a little bit of a target on their back next year after all the hype of this season. And, of course, Embiid on social media, he puts a target on himself. I don't know that they get better without adding another piece. I do think Ben Simmons, there's going to be progress there. Embiid, all these guys are going to get a little bit better. But this was their kind of catch everybody by surprise, if you call them a Cinderella type story, but not really because there was so much hype associated with them. But this was their coming out party. That might be the better way to describe it. Maybe they get to 54. next year? I mean, those extra wins are really hard to come by because winning 16 games in a row isn't easy. They did it this year. There's no telling they can do that again. And every time you lose a game, that obviously costs you a chance to win it. And a couple of those here and there, next season, do they take a few games for granted and see those kind of slip through their fingers? What if LeBron James leaves the East? Does that make the Cavaliers? Are those easy wins now for Philadelphia? The Eastern Conference does play a role in this thing. So, I don't know. I think we'll see a number probably close to 50 for next year. I'm not sold on either direction. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see what players end up with Philly, but they made a big leap this year, and I'm not sure that a similar leap is coming. This is where you start to make very small incremental gains, unless you bring in a superstar, which is, like what you saw from a team like the Rockets. Massive, massive roster moves that, yes, that changes things, but minimal roster moves, if that's what you get, you usually see small bumps. So that was the season win total thing. When you look at this Philly team, I know everybody says LeBron would be a great fit. Most guys would be a good fit. I'm not sure that obviously, there's no universe where you turn down LeBron James. Let me make that abundantly clear. I've been fighting on that side of the fence in this LeBron James free agency thing since the minute it looked like he was leaving Cleveland. There are Laker fans that don't want LeBron James. I cannot wrap my head around that. Dude is unbelievable. He's unbelievable. He's better than ever, and he's 34, 33, 34 now. He's a machine. However, in terms of just pure fit going forward, everybody talks about how LeBron James can mentor Ben Simmons, which is true, except Ben Simmons is already a guy that needs to be playing big minutes with the ball in his hand. How do you mentor a guy like that? This isn't like the minor leagues where LeBron can play 36 minutes and Ben Simmons can play like 18 and LeBron can teach him how to do it. They would need him out there. He's not a floor spacer. Is he going to be the guy that initiates the offense? Is LeBron James going to be playing off the ball? Fat chance. I do think there are other guys that are better fits. What if you put Klay Thompson on this team? Put him in there instead of J.J. Redick. Then you get J.J. Redick, slightly better shooter. They're both very good. Bigger, stronger, more athletic, outstanding defender. I mean, that's not a thing that's going to happen right now. But I'm just saying there are pieces that probably fit better. I don't know that any piece makes the team as good as they would be with LeBron James, but it does feel like there's a certain longevity to it. And if you bring in a guy like LeBron, there is a chance that guys that, like Ben Simmons, require the basketball and aren't getting it like they normally would, it might alienate them a tiny bit. I don't know. And again, I'm not talking about this as like LeBron being a problem. If he goes to your team, you say yes, you roll out the freaking red carpet, you throw a ticker tape parade, banners everywhere, Arrested Development style, you hang a banner. But long term, I think there are more interesting fits on this type of team. Better shooters. Guys that can play off the ball a little bit more. That's just not the Kings' game. And he's still so good, he doesn't need to change himself to fit with someone like this. Go build a super team where you can be the number one ball handler. You don't have to be, but you should be. Problem with the Philadelphia 76ers is if you take the ball out of Ben Simmons' hand, it renders him a little, fairly useless. His incredible skill is starting the offense, is penetrating, is being gigantic, is seeing the floor. He can't shoot. What good is he to space the floor around LeBron James? It's just a fit thing. It's just a fit thing. And that's why, to me, it does feel like LeBron's best ticket to victory is to go build a team somewhere where there's just a ton of cap space and not a lot of guys locked in. Right now, that's actually the Lakers. You can go into L.A. They could trade for Kawhi Leonard. Either way, he walks into Los Angeles, there is no one that even considers competing with him as the primary ball handler. Brandon Ingram? Nah. Lonzo Ball? Nah. Don't kid yourself. All those guys would be thrilled to play around LeBron James, and he doesn't render them useless by taking the basketball out of their hands. What if they traded for Kawhi Leonard and none of those guys were left? Who cares? Kawhi can shoot. He doesn't need to be the primary ball handler. Paul George, we saw it this year. He played alongside Russ Westbrook, and he was fine. There are arguments to be made on all sides in this thing. You could put Paul George on this 76ers team. That'd be a great addition from a fit perspective. What a big team. A long team. Okay, what about the fantasy side of this stuff? That's what you came here for, right? Well, Joel Embiid, top fantasy player on the team, ranked number 31 overall on the year. He was a guy that, to me, felt like the risk was never worth the reward. He was always off the board before it got to me. And I'm okay with that. He turns the ball over a ton. He's a high-volume, free throw shooter. His field goal percent, frankly, I feel should be higher, given his skill set. 48.3, that doesn't feel big enough. The 1.8 blocks is a good number, 0.6 steals, 23 and 11, 3 assists. All that stuff is outstanding. I mean, this is an unbelievable young basketball player, but he's got to find a way to get the turnovers down from 3.7. Would be lovely to see him get the free throw number up a tiny bit. Maybe that does happen. And the injury stuff on top of everything else. I think you can call this season a success. Most people drafting Embiid, if somebody told them they'd get 3/4 of the year out of him, they'd say, cool, I'll take it. But the problem is 3/4 of the year for a guy who's not inside the top 15 does drop him a little bit. We've talked about this. The guys are, as they start to get ranked a little more closely, a little more bunched. So Embiid totals was number 47, which is probably later than he got drafted in your league. Probably. Maybe you're in a league of terrified Dan Besbris followers, and he fell a little bit. I know a lot of people love taking him around 20, and to me that was too soon. The upside is there. He has the fantasy stat set to be a first-round type guy, but the turnovers either have to come down or the other stuff has to come up. That's the only way to get there. He's either got to get the field goal percent over 50 and the free throw percent up around 80. That's how he can jump another round of value, get himself into early, mid-second round discussion. Drop turnovers under 3. That would be a way to do it. Get blocks over 2. That would be a way to do it. But points and rebounds, those are not going to get you there, even with a decent block number. I mean, think of it this way. Kristaps Porzingis, if he puts together a full season, he ends up ahead of Embiid, which seems crazy, right? But the honest-to-goodness truth, just how the numbers bear themselves out. Mistakes do count in a 9-cat format. That's why I like it. I know he has the ball in his hand a lot, but 3.7. I mean, he has Ben Simmons had the ball in his hand plenty, and he was lower than that, 3.4 turnovers per game. Where does Joel Embiid go from here? I mean, I think 25 to 35 is probably about where you can expect his numbers to be, and then you can also expect him to miss some time. Maybe he does finally put it together and play a whole season. Maybe you have the stones for that, but I doubt he falls far enough in drafts next year for me to end up with him. Not that I wouldn't want to, but I don't think he's fallen past 35, and that's where I would go for it. Rob Covington, by all accounts, an excellent year. Ended up at number 36, I believe. In one format, 37. It depends where you look. That's a big win. I think a lot of people figured that his fantasy outlook was in real trouble with Ben Simmons around. I didn't feel that way. I was still fairly pro Covington coming into this year, though I will admit I was less pro Embiid and pro Simmons, so I can't pat myself on the back for getting all of them right. But with Covington, I figured, this is a guy that plays outstanding defense. His steals and blocks totals are always great. Low turnover guy, 3-pointers, floor spacing. They'll find a way to play him. I think a lot of folks figured he would just get squeezed out by Dario Saric and Ben Simmons. But Covington is way better than people realize. He is a difference maker on that team, especially when he's right. Because he can go through some pretty prolonged slumps. Man, though, the steals and the blocks, he can carry you in those categories. I love Rob Covington. I think he's going to be undervalued again next year. Nobody believes that he can do it, but he's durable, he's good, and he does it in 3 of the 4 categories that I love the most. Steals, blocks, and threes. And free throw percentage. Excuse me. Forget threes. Those are fine, but you can find them elsewhere. Good free throw shooter. Steals and blocks through the roof. I mean, 3 years in a row is averaged 2.2, 2.9, and 2.6 combined steals and blocks per game. What a great number to get if you can get him in, 5th round territory. And you often could this year. He was pre-ranked 66. And he outperformed basically every metric. Ben Simmons, this is one I got wrong. I'll admit that. I got Covington right. I don't know if you could say I got Embiid right or wrong. He played more games than I thought, but he also didn't hit his mark, so I'm going to give myself half credit. Ben Simmons, I got wrong. I thought he would struggle with consistency, and he was, by all accounts, extremely consistent. He's got that big frame that allows him to put decent mileage on his tires, and he played 81 out of the 82 games. Led the team in minutes this year, per game and total. And then, as we mentioned, 16, 8, and 8. I mean, those are significant. That's popcorn numbers, but those are big popcorn numbers. 16, 8, and 8 is not nothing. 1.7 steals, 0.9 blocks. Those are great, great numbers. Free throw percent does hurt you. The turnovers do hurt you. You can sort of... The thing with Simmons is neither one of those was so awful that you couldn't counterbalance it. 4.2 free throws per game at a bad clip is pretty painful. That's the one. I think if you're looking at Simmons, you have to make sure you put somebody on your team that's a high-volume, big-time free throw guy. Turnovers you can handle. Throw an Otto Porter on your team. Or hell, Rob Covington, and you're back in business there. And then three-pointers, as we mentioned, those are... Everybody's hitting threes now, so if you got one guy that's not, you'll be fine. Going forward, this obviously contingent on who ends up with the 76ers next year, if anybody. Ben Simmons does actually have room for growth. That would be the addition of a shot, an improvement at the free throw line, or an improvement in turnovers. I don't think the turnovers are going to get better all that quickly. He does a lot of the ball handling for this team. I don't think the three-pointers are going to get better all that quickly. His shot is pretty whack. He does most of his damage near the rim, hence the 54.5% shooting. I do think there's an opportunity for him to get a little bit better at the free throw line. If he could get up and over 60% there, he goes from being a top 45 guy to being a top 40 guy. That's a little jump, but it's a big jump. So I'm okay with you guys taking Ben Simmons in the 40s. I think he has a pretty safe path to that number again this year. Barring, of course, LeBron showing up in town. We'll all reassess this stuff after free agency. But assuming that he's still sort of the leader of the pack, there's no reason why his numbers should shave all that much. And given his size, speed, all that stuff, he's going to be a steals and blocks guy. That's just in his nature. They might come down a little bit over the course of his career, but year 1 to year 2, that's not where you see a big athletic drop-off. Yeah, J.J. Redick. We don't know if he's back, but he was a top 75 guy. You know exactly what you're getting out of J.J. Points and threes. And a good free throw percent. You just hope he gets to the line enough for it to matter. To J.J.'s credit, he did attempt three free throws per game this year. That's pretty good. He knows he's good at the foul line. He tried to get there, but this is a career high. If you're wondering, boy, I don't feel like J.J. Redick's ever been that relevant at the free throw line. You'd be right. 3.1 attempts per game is a career best for a guy that's been in the NBA for more than a decade. He's gotten close. He took 3 per game with the Clippers 5 years ago. But this was a career high in free throws per game. Always has a good free throw percentage, so we're not really worried about that. This was actually a career high in threes made per game for Redick at 2.8, although, again, just a small increase over previous years. Managed to hold the field goal percent at a pretty good number despite all the outside shooting, so that's good. Doesn't rebound, doesn't assist, doesn't steal, doesn't block, doesn't turn the ball over, does score. That's what you're getting. You know what you got. Very poor man's Klay Thompson type line. That's why we brought him up before. And, this is pretty safe fantasy play for a guy, worth mentioning, by the way, for a guy who generally misses about 2 weeks to 3 weeks per season. He's durable, but not perfect. He has a back spasm here and a sore whatever there. He doesn't usually miss half a year. Not a bunch of nagging injuries. If he's going to miss time, it's usually one big whopper of a thing. But he's got a lot of mid-70s in games played over the course of his career. A lot of seasons sitting right around that 70 to 78 range. So that's fine. I think he was largely underdrafted this year, so you probably got yourself a pretty good pick with JJ if you grabbed him. We'll just have to wait and see where he ends up next season, then we can reassess. But he's a pretty safe play. Dario Saric, one of the last names I want to mention on this Philly team, he also improved, managed to get himself inside the top 85. I still don't like his fantasy game. People like him more than I do. I'm not seeing it. Maybe it's the limited upside. That might be what's doing it for me. We always, here at Hoopball, we really like guys that can make that big leap. And for Saric, there's no defensive stats, so there's that. And I don't know that that's necessarily going to change. I know he's just a second-year player, but he averaged 0.7 and 0.4 steals and blocks his first year. He played 3 extra minutes per game this season, and it was 0.7 steals and 0.3 blocks. So that number actually went down despite % more minutes. He's durable so far, so that's good. He's a decent foul shooter, so that's good. He'll make you some threes, that's fine. But, man, no steals, no blocks, that's rough. That's tough to stomach. He'd made a big improvement this year in field goal percent. I think you could argue the reason that he had the big value bump year over year from 41 to 45%. I do think that that's sustainable. He's a power forward. 41% was pretty low. Pretty god-awful. But if he's not getting you any steals or any blocks, there's just almost no way for him to climb into that top 75 discussion, right? How many guys on your list that don't steal or block at all can get particularly far beyond top 75? And we just talked about J.J. Redick. He was like right around top 70. I think he was number 70, actually. And he's a minimal steals, minimal blocks guy. As you get above that, the guys just usually do one or the other or both. It's hard to find someone who's just awful at both of those categories and sits well inside the top 75. Oh, there are a couple of examples. Kevin Love, 0.7 and 0.4, and he was a top 40 guy. High volume free throws, big time rebounds and threes. I mean, there are ways to get there. Klay Thompson didn't do a whole lot on the defensive side this year, but just great percentages and game-changing scoring and threes. So again, it's not outlawed. It's not off limits. Devin Booker, not great. Enes Kanter. There are a smattering of examples of guys that are down in that 1 combined steals and blocks range. But the thing they all have in common is that they're good enough in usually one category to make a big-time dent for you. Like Enes Kanter, big-time field goal dent. He shot 59% this year. He had 11 rebounds per game and averaged 1 combined steal and block. He's probably the best example that we could come up with. And then it's J.J. Redick. You basically go all the way to J.J. Redick after that. He's the lowest. He averaged 0.6 combined steals and blocks. Far and away the lowest combined total of defensive stats of anybody inside the top 75. And it's just not close. In fact, I don't think there's anybody at 0.7, 0.8, or 0.9. I think you got to go all the way to the ones we were talking about. So it's really hard. It's really hard to be inside the top 75 and average 1 steal and block combined or less, which is why for a guy like Saric, who's right at that number, unless he somehow gets his scoring up to 18, 19 points per game, or his rebounding up to 9, or he takes 5 free throws instead of 2.8 at a high-volume clip, there's going to need to be some massive leap for him to ever get over that hump. And so, he's got this fun nickname, the homie. I know RotoWorld likes him a lot. This is one of those ones where I think I have to disagree. I don't see him going higher. Unless he magically turns around the defensive stuff. Maybe this coming year, a renewed effort on the defensive end, and suddenly he's averaging 1.1 steals per game instead of 0.7. I mean, it's a significant change. That's a 50% leap for him in that category. Then you can make the jump. But most of these guys that are doing nothing on the defensive side, they sit outside the top 75. There is a pretty obvious reason for that. Those are categories where you make a dent and you make it quick. And without contributions in those two categories, your value plummets. I mean, there's some guys out there that look pretty good on the basketball court, but just did nothing on defense, and so their value capped. And then there are guys that look terrible on the basketball court, but all sorts of stuff on defense. And Lonzo Ball, great example of that. Just miserable percentages, but averaged 2.5 combined steals and blocks, and so, bada boom, he's at number 76. He's right behind Dario Saric. Can you believe that? It's sort of tough to iron that out. Ersan Ilyasova and Marco Bellinelli, we're not even going to talk about those guys because Lord knows where they'll be next year. I'm sure Philly would love to get them at a bargain basement deal halfway through the season, but I don't know that we can guarantee that'll happen. And they probably won't be good enough to own to start the season next year somewhere else. There you go. That's your Philadelphia 76ers. Again, I got this one very much wrong from a team season-long performance standpoint, but from a fantasy standpoint, I think I missed on Ben Simmons, and I was pretty close with everybody else. I'll give Saric credit. Like I said, he was better this year than I expected, but still not a real difference maker. J.J. Redick, probably I'd argue played a handful fewer games than I would have hoped. I rarely find myself needing three-pointers at that point in a draft. I think that's why I generally don't end up with JJ. I got no problem with him. And then Covington I figured was going to be a steal this year, and he was. And Joel Embiid was just too much of a risk, which he also kind of was, even though he played in 63 games. That's still, I mean, we're celebrating 63 games. Jimmy Butler played in 64, and I think we all crushed his year because he missed 8 weeks at the end of the season. It's just that Embiid missed his close to the end of the season, but not quite. I mean, double standard type stuff. Excuse me, I think Butler played a couple games in the playoffs. So what was he, like 62 in the regular? Doesn't matter. You guys catch my drift. They both played about the same number of games. A lot of it has to do with what's expected of you and how you get there. Coming up the rest of the week on Fantasy NBA Today, Tuesday edition, I'll be joined by Adrian Benjamins, my illustrious co-host. Wednesday, you'll have me solo once again. Thursday, it'll be me and Neil, and then Friday, Adrian and Neil will wrap up the week and wrap up the Atlantic Division, and our tour of the NBA will come to a conclusion this week. We'll also get into some draft stuff, as I mentioned, and Adrian and Neil do a much better job of keeping tabs on the young guys than I do, so I'll make sure to pick their brains, and perhaps they will pick each other's brains. It's incestuous here over at Fantasy NBA Today, but we're okay with it. By the way, I thought one stat was kind of interesting this year. There's one player in the NBA who played in 100 games or more this season. I think we all know who it is. LeBron James. What a year. 104 games played on the season. And I don't know that anybody else... Did anybody else clear 90? Yeah, Al Horford, 91. Klay Thompson played 94 games this year. I mean, that's think Jason Tatum was in the mid to high 90s also. Crazy number. All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody. It's the end of the pod. This is your Monday edition of Fantasy NBA Today. I don't know who we're covering tomorrow. I'll text with Adrian. We'll figure it out. It'll be one of the remaining 4 teams. Just a couple left. A couple teams from New York. Maybe one of those 2. Maybe. Maybe Boston. I don't know. Maybe Toronto. I don't know. Just to tune in and find out. Kind of a fun division, actually. After a weird Central division. 2 teams that I really wanted to cover, and then 3 that nobody wants to talk about. Atlantic should be a good one. Again, tomorrow with Adrian. Hope you'll tune in for that. I am Dan Besbris. This is Fantasy NBA Today, a hoopball presentation. Enjoy your Monday. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.